And here we go. So welcome everybody this evening. This is the second of our conversations with the conference minister evenings and the very last of our 2020 annual meeting events. I'm not sure that excites everybody else quite the way it excites me, but that is an exciting piece for me to hear. So as many of you know, when we meet in person at the Grapponi Center, we have these connecting sessions in the middle of the day during lunch, and you can grab a plate of food and bring it in, or you go to one of the connecting sessions and eat it the other time, all those type of things. And one of the traditional ones is conversations with the conference minister. We tend to fill a room both with people and plenty of questions and have I think generally it's about 45 minutes for conversation. This year we decided we were going to, as we move things virtually, we were going to split these up and do two of them, because frankly, there is plenty to be talking about in 2020. Okay, thank you, Ruth. So as we step into things, now a lot of times when we do this at the Grapponi Center, I have like 2 or 3 things that I want to talk with you all about, so I lead in with those ideas. I don't so much have that today, again, because there's so much to talk about, it's hard to pick something. Other than I wanted to give one like little overview thought, and that is just to say, for me in 2020, I sense that the relationship between local churches in the wider church, or in particular local churches in the conference setting, since that's what I mostly work with, the relationship has changed. There, as I can assess it, is a different sense of relevance to the conference for local churches at the moment. There's a different sense of interconnectedness. And like probably most of us, when this started to shift in the middle of March and as we stepped into April, I was thinking, okay, yeah, this is interesting. This will last for a couple of months and then everything will go back to normal. How many things do we think that about? Plenty of things. I actually now believe that there has been a change between the local church and the conference and the wider church for good. I don't know if it'll stay exactly what it is at this moment, but I don't think it'll go back to what it was before this time either. And so I think it was just important to name that I think that that relationship has changed as we step into our conversations this evening. Now, with that said, the rest of the evening is yours to direct the conversation. We can talk about whatever you want to be talking about this evening, be it COVID-19 and how our churches are handling it, being racial justice work, be it Horton Center, be it all the things we're seeing in Search and Call right now. Any questions you might have from the annual meeting, things that are happening in the national setting of the church, anything and everything is fair game. It's your conversation to direct from this point forward. And we'll be in conversation to just a few minutes after 7. So who has a question or an inquiry that you'd like to put forward? And we'll start our talk. I see Pam's hand up.
I want to respond to what you just said about the changing relationship of the conference. And overall, I have not felt so supported by the conference ministers and the conference office in several years as I have in this last year. There's been much more contact from you. I've appreciated the pep rally kind of aspect of what you've been doing. I have appreciated the interaction with some direction for churches. I feel much more that there's been a connection of we're all in this together and how can we support one another better. From my perspective, my church has heard more from the conference, of course, indirectly through me. But I have been sharing what you have messages that you have sent and that others have communicated. So I think there is definitely, even as I retire, this is really my last week. On Sunday, I will retire finally. And I just feel like there's been a whole lot more support and a lot more communication. And I'm very appreciative. I would have felt very much like I was out there on a limb by myself. So thank you.
Thank you. I mean, I think the reality for everyone these last 8 months is the needs have been different. So we've all had to step up in different ways. And that's what we've been trying to do out of the conference office as well. So. Kathy.
I'm thinking back to when you first came to New Hampshire, and something like a third of our churches were at some point in transition. I just glanced at the New Hampshire Conference website. It looks like about half of that is taken care of, that we're about half as much in transition. And I wonder if you want to talk about what it took to get there and what you see going forward in terms of churches needing pastors, pastors needing to retire, whatever you see in that picture.
So I'm going to start by saying I think looking at the webpage right now is a little bit of a false narrative. In that we have a search and call meeting tomorrow, and I think like 6 to 8 churches are going to be going up on that. So, you know, it all shifts at any moment. We have had, the summer was a good time as far as us calling and settling pastors, which is kind of incredible. We extended calls to 6 settled pastors, all of who candidated at least some portion virtually. Kind of incredible. We were able to change and adapt and do those type of things. That said, as we've stepped into the fall, something that I was a little anxious about, we're starting to see happen. And that is this time has been exhausting enough for some of our pastors that we have some folks that are saying, yeah, it's now time for me to, you know, I might have not retired for another year, but it's now time for me to retire. We have a few folks for whom they're just like, I can't go back to in-person worship, and that's what my church needs, so I need to step away. We have lots of that stuff that's so early on that it hasn't hit our website yet. We're still probably running, I'll know the exact numbers tomorrow when we go through this. We're still probably running about 40 churches at some stage of search and call at the moment, which is still not much under that third. So we keep working at it. We have some good success. I will say the change since I've come is we used to run about half of our churches would be full-time calls and half of them would be part-time calls. It's probably now only about a third of them are full-time calls. Many, many more part-time calls of different scopes of work. So. I don't know if I fully covered everything you asked about, but.
I'd say the approach of the conference is different since you've come.
Yes. So just to say a word to that, there's a couple things that we do differently now than were happening up until the point I arrived. The biggest kind of 2 pieces I would name is we're really training search committees to work with candidates differently, because for most of our churches, the market doesn't support the old style of looking at candidates. You know, when we would talk about, okay, you'll post your profile and you'll get a dozen to 15 profiles in a month, and after 3 months you'll have 35 profiles, and nobody gets 35 profiles in 3 months anymore. You know, the good ones, not the good ones, that was a bad way of saying it, the ones that get the most response, get, you know, kind of the most active response, they may get a dozen to 15 over 3 months. So it's, the market is much more spread out, and not as robust for most of our calls, which means part of what we teach our search committees is, instead of doing that, you get critical mass, you reduce it, you reduce it, you reduce it type approach. Now you're having to work with each candidate on their own timeline, because if you get 2 candidates week 1 and then don't get another 2 candidates till the 4th week and another 2 candidates till week 7, by the time you're saying, okay, well, now I've got 6 I can start, the week 1 ones have probably moved on. So you kind of have to work individually with each person. And that's kind of a new training piece for a lot of our search committees. Most of the search committees I talk to, I go in and say, if you have done a search process and it was any longer ago than 4 years ago, I want you to forget everything you know. And let's start relearning how you do search and call today. The other thing we do a lot of today is what I call right sizing, which is searching for the associate pastor at South Church in Concord, is very different than searching for the Sunday only pastor at Bartlett. They're just, you know, they're apples and poodles different. And to effectively use the time and energy of people in search and call, we need to not say, okay, you've got to do this one process and do it exactly this way, because that might work wonderfully well for South Church in Concord for a full-time associate position. It's not going to work wonderfully well in trying to get the right people to look at Bartlett. And so we help right-size this process and say, here's the things that you need to do that are going to help you find the right pastor for you. And these things, you don't need to put your energy into them because they're not going to help you. So in some ways, we're helping each church develop some uniquenesses to their own search and call process to best benefit what works for them.
And yes, we're very fortunate. We just got our new pastor, John Hogue, in North Conway. And this was an interesting process because we had never followed the rules before. North Conway did their thing their way. And so this time we decided to follow the rules. We had I was on the search committee for Gil Healy, and the profile team and the search team was all one. And when it was all done, we were washed out. This time we had 2 different teams, which worked beautiful. And thanks to the UCC office, you got us through it. And when it came time to vote and accept our new pastor, everybody said, well, we don't know what to do. We've never done this before. And of course, Pastor John had never done this before. And I'm the licensed pastor in North Conway. So I'm there when nobody else is. And when he came on, he said, what do we do? You know, how are we going to do this? And nobody knew, but we've worked it out. And between your office and our church, it's worked beautiful.
Well, thank you. Yeah, commendations to North Conway. You followed the rules until you couldn't anymore because nobody knew what the rules were when it came
We didn't know
this
what
time.
the rules were. No, it
North
was
Conway
all new territory.
was literally scheduled to candidate John on March 22nd.
Yep.
And I think their last in-person Sunday was either the 8th or the 15th. I don't remember which. And so then we had to sit down and say, how do you do this when you can't be together? And
Yeah.
really just worked on that. And they had a couple page write-ups that I'm looking around the screen and seeing how many other newly called pastors we have on the screen that ended up benefiting several other churches, although everybody adjusted it their own ways.
Right.
North Conway kind of convinced us at first we could do it. So many thanks to North Conway.
Yeah, I think we were the first to do it.
You were absolutely the first to do it.
Yes, we were. And we said, well, this is something. So we better act like good people and do it right so other people can follow.
That was history. So
yeah, it was. And it was an experience and it was well worth it. And we're trying to figure out, we're going to try to open up for inside church service on November 22nd. And we'll see how that goes. We've been doing them outside or viral up till now. But that was interesting. I thought I'd share it.
thank you, Jerry. Harriet.
So I have my hot button question about
Okay.
search. I wasn't going to ask it, but you're all talking about search. What kind of progress? I bet you know what I'm going to ask you. What kind of progress is the conference making, or can the conference make, in increasing diversity among candidates? We have one African-American pastor in our conference. What are churches doing to even consider that? What kind of supports can churches get to consider that? What can a conference minister do? You know what I'm asking.
I do know exactly what you're asking.
Right.
I am going to say, to me, in our search and call work, that is one of our biggest challenges. We are, you are correct. We have one African American pastor and one Asian American pastor serving congregations, and that is our racial diversity in New Hampshire.
Two of my favorite people, those two people.
And they're two absolutely awesome people. 2 out of 133 is not getting where we would like to be. So we are actually meeting with both our local church pastors of color and some of our folks who are working in other centers, pastors of color, and having regular conversations about how do we engage our churches so that they can, in the search and call, be open to other possibilities. And because I think the biggest thing we can do is just be really clear and careful with how we set this up, and how we open minds, trying to learn some from how we have done that in the past with LGBTQ persons. Because that's a place we've had more success. But we need, I mean, let's just really be blunt. We need to be able to have conversations with our predominantly white congregations, which is every single congregation in this conference except for one, and help them see how having a person of color can bring new and creative dynamics to them, so they're at least willing to look that way as they're looking at candidates. We also don't see a lot of person of color candidates. So that's the other side of it, is we've got to learn how to recruit them to look at our churches. Churches can be open-minded, but unless we have the candidates coming into the system, they can't act on this open-mindedness. So it's both sides of that. It is definitively our growing edge, and if we are going to be the racial justice conference we've committed, we're going to have to learn how to do this.
Well, that's kind of why I said, what can a conference minister do? Like, I feel like you must feel like your hands are tied behind your back. But can the racial justice mission group help in any way? And if you don't maybe have to answer that now, but
yeah.
Like, I'm feeling like in my new role there, I feel like we should. And some of us are working really hard on facilitator skills and with Velda. And so we're out there, we're there.
There may be some work on both sides of that. I think particularly the recruitment side is, I mean, New Hampshire, except for in a few locations, is not a particularly diverse state anyhow. How do we make our churches attractive to candidates to look at it, and how do we sell that? And that's some work that I think the racial justice work may be able to help with. We just need to figure it out. So, Pam?
Thank you.
I just want to say that before everything hit the wall with all of the issues that have been brought up in the last 4 or 5 years around Black Lives Mattering and the diversity, I had a congregation that I actually brought it up and preached on it on a Sunday during Lent, and got a lot of pushback about there's no problem here, and I don't see color, and all of the stuff that you don't want to hear. And then everything happened and people were like, wow. I have had a fresh air kid in my life for since 2003, and his family calls us their New England family. And I have walked beside him and seen it from his perspective, and it's a scary world. And I think there's a whole lot more work that has to happen in local congregations to recognize their white privilege. Frankly, I just do not see, I would not think that things would go well in some of the churches that I've pastored. Regardless of what they say, I'm not seeing an openness and an acceptance, and there's enough problems with being a pastor at times to say things that people don't want to hear. But in the last 4 years, I am just much more aware of the hassles of talking about this. I have gotten pushback, and I've just gotten to the point that I'm going to say what needs to be said regardless.
So I don't know if you, and I mean the collective, you all, the written annual report that I wrote that was on the webpage with all the annual meeting information. One of the things that I wrote in there is something I've repeated several times, and it really has been one of the predominant things about the church that has stayed with me in this year. I have been so incredibly proud of our churches and their adaptability and the ways they found to make things work as they have responded to COVID-19, something we could never have expected happening. And churches have really, really stepped up in that. And then a few months into that, we had George Floyd's death, along with, Breonna Taylor. You could go on through the list. And many of our churches really struggled in conversation around those things. And what struck me was how well equipped we were for the thing that we never expected, and yet how under-equipped we still seem to be as church in having a conversation that we've been having for 400 plus years. And that we still have such a major piece of work to do in that area. Bryan and then Gerry.
Okay.
I just wanted to ask if any of you have heard of the book called Cast. I don't know the first name, right? By Wilkerson. And that is just a marvelous book that is so easily read. Well, not easily. It's hard to read, actually. You don't want to read it. But it's a good talking point for get people started. And that's one thing that we're doing in our church. We're having a book study, and we've got the community and lots of people involved in, as well as congregation. Because there is an awful lot of work that obviously needs to be done in our state, which is so white. People are blind to the fact that we have this privilege that you mentioned. They just do not see it. So that's all. I just wanted to mention that was a good read. Thanks.
Thank you for that. And I kind of picked on us as church. I do want to say there's some churches that are really trying some good things. We've seen across. I know Amherst has, Dover has. I mean, I don't want to totally say nobody's done anything by any stretch. And I will say, since we've mentioned it, our next racial justice roundtable that I expect will be out sometime in the month of November will be around white privilege. So we'll be talking directly to that. Gerry, I had promised you.
Yeah. We put out one of those sandwich signs that said a BLM on it. And we did not expect the explosion within the church that we had, because people thought it was too political. And that surprised me, because of course we care about everybody, but we wanted to let our neighbors know that we cared about them too. And so the diaconate decided to take that down and put up, every week we put up a new sign with something encouraging. To make it softer. And I don't think that's the way we need to go. If we're too soft, we're not getting the message out. And so we decided to get a little stronger and see what happened. And so far, it's been okay. It's just, we have to just be careful how we do it, I guess. But it surprised me. I did not expect that. So we're just working around it, I guess.
Yeah, thank you. This might not be the topic for this moment, but one of the things that I think is important to talk about, one of the things that keeps us from doing some of the justice work is the declaration that something is too political.
Yes.
And I like to raise the question of who gets to define if something's political. Some of the things, probably many of the things that we speak to as church have been things that the church has spoken to for 2,000 years.
Mm-hmm.
Why does somebody get to come along in 2020 and put a political label on it, and all of a sudden we can't talk about it?
Yeah. Yeah.
I think that's one of our things we have to work through.
Absolutely.
Judy, I see that your digital hand is raised. And Judy, you are muted still.
Remind me to lower it when it's time. Thank you for bringing up these subjects. I I guess I've gotten kind of more outspoken in my time as I have really understood more and more what a wonderful rabble rouser Jesus was. And so when anyone sort of says, Judy, I'll go, oh no, Jesus was a rabble rouser. And that includes what some people are thinking is political. My God, those are the issues that our church grew up on. Those are the issues that we need to be addressing. We too, in the wonderful little Nelson congregation, were faced with, oh my God, you can't put up a BLM sign like that. And I said, we need to. And of course, no matter how there are more voices than mine, but still it's a struggle. And you know what? It's uncomfortable, but it's okay. And I'm going to continue rabble rousing.
Good for you. Keep it up. Pam.
Sorry, I really didn't plan to say a whole lot, but to respond to Harriet, when we have congregations who, mine included, had 3 fits about a small group of people about putting up a BLM sign, how can we expect to invite a clergy in who typically are going to come from a little bit of a different culture, experience life differently because of the way Black people are treated? It's hard enough to be clergy and say things that will hopefully stretch people. When you're white in a white congregation, I think it's very difficult for us to expect that we can just have someone come in who, when there's such insidious reactions to even a sign, I think we have to do more work in the congregations before we can recruit, if that is a word, people from other cultures to be our leaders.
I think that is one of the commitments we take very seriously is, yes, we would like to be able to recruit, but we also need to recruit clergy, since that was what we were talking earlier, to places where where the community keeps them safe and the community values their voice. And so that's why I said it's both sides. It's congregational work and it's recruitment work, and we have to be about both of that. So. Rebecca, and then Cy.
So this is on a different tack, so I hope I'm not cutting anyone off. But I'm just wondering if you could talk a little bit about how the conference and maybe the national church is working with rural congregations and getting them the help they need to have internet access. Because not everybody's got it like Concord's got it. And there are, people driving to the Dunkin' Donuts so that they can have a church service at this point.
So I had an answer for you until you defined the question more narrow.
Go where you need to go with that. That's fine.
And then I lost it a little bit, but so let me start with the question you asked about pieces with internet service. Obviously, our places, we can't quite build the infrastructure part of that task. But there are ways in which we've been working with churches. The national setting made some micro grants available. We've had some $5,000 loans through the Cornerstone Fund made available. And part of those are 4 things. So I would approve a loan, and they're only good through the end of December. So if you're going to do them, right away for a church that came to me and said, hey, we want to be able to buy 25 iPads so that, we can give them to our elders and they can work off cell service rather than off of, yeah, totally just went out of my head. Wi-Fi. So there are ways that we're, trying to create some stuff to do those opportunities. The rural church thing in general, I think is a question that's beyond that. I mean, that feels pressing at the moment because of the COVID-19 stuff. I totally understand. But I think how we set rural churches up for success in their ministries is very much a real question. The national setting has been working on it was supposed to be a gathering of folks from rural churches to do some of that work. And of course that hasn't happened. So it's happening virtually. I will say, I've said this a lot over the last year. One of the questions people used to ask me early on was what was my biggest surprise coming to New Hampshire. And I spent all my parish ministry time in Connecticut and then started my judicatory ministry work in South Dakota. And coming to New Hampshire, I'm like, oh, this is really going to be using 90% of my Connecticut experience, because New Hampshire is going to be like Connecticut and yada, yada, yada. And I got here and like, no, actually, 80% of our churches look at themselves as rural churches. And so all this rural church work I did in South Dakota, I draw on that so much more than I ever expected it in working with churches and trying to help them. Part of what I've kind of caught on to is rural church is really a self-definition. I mean, my churches in South Dakota would look churches at New Hampshire and say, there's no way you're a rural church. You can get to a city in an hour. You are not a rural church. It doesn't take you 5 hours to get to, a place where you can go to the grocery store or a thing like. But if you look at yourself that way, all that rural stuff really makes a difference to you. And so we're really trying to feed that stuff and help that out. And so, yeah, I kind of think of New Hampshire having two pretty distinct cultures. If you kind of draw a line up 93, and depending on the days, I would do the east-west road differently. Some days I would tell you it's 101, other days I'll tell you it's Route 4. But, one of those two, that group does not so much think, if you're in there, you think of yourself not as much often for most churches as rural. But if you're west of there or north of there, most of our churches think of themselves as rural. And so it's very much something that we have to work with and support.
So I guess what I'm wondering, sorry, follow up. So I think what I'm wondering is, the COVID-19 is a different challenge. Of course, it challenges all churches, but if there is no connectivity, it's another challenge altogether, I guess is what I'm thinking about. And knowing that people define themselves as rural or urban in their own ways. And I see what you're saying about that, but I was just wondering what, if there was anything going on, even politically, to sort of influence the providers and the state to help provide connection. So anyway, thank you.
So I do know, I know this through the Council of Churches, that there have been some conversations with the governor's office around some of those pieces. And yes, by our broader, wider church connections, there have been some of that. And I think I think I would say yes and no to your supposition of this is a different things for churches that are in some of those more outlying areas than it is in that. I think you're right. I think there are different spots of connectivity around the state. I can just be shocked that this town can have excellent connectivity and you think it's nowhere near anything, and the next town over has none of it, and you're never quite sure why. And so it's really kind of a hodgepodge type piece. I would say though, I think digital technology has not been the #1 asset for this COVID time. I think imagination has been. And our churches who've been able to imagine other ways to do it, whether it's doing things digitally or doing things other ways, are the ones who've really kept the most connection. And I've seen churches who have done not so much digitally, but have imagined ministry in new ways, been able to keep really good, wonderful connections during this time.
Thank you.
I had said, Cy, were you the one who I said got to go next? You are still muted too.
I'm wondering how you envision future church services going once we're able to be in person.
So if I was to jump ahead 5 years, I think we will be having in-person worship in many of our churches? Yes, I do. Do I think it will look like what it did a year ago? No, because I think we'll have changed some of our traditions by then. And those will have worked themselves even into in-person worship. As I listen to churches, I think most churches will continue some type of hybrid connection of, if they've had success with digital worship, they will do in-person worship, but they'll also continue some component of digital worship because they're connecting with folks that they don't connect with by coming into their building. And what's their spiritual responsibility to those folks they've now made connections with? I think I still suspect there's more imagination that's going to happen and work its way into our worship, even in the next 6 months, that's going to affect things. For our churches who are in places where it would not be safe to meet for in-person worship during the Advent Christmas season, when the music is so much of how we experience the divine in that season. What do you do? I suspect that there are going to be churches who find ways of dance and movement and those type of things as ways to express the holy in worship. That would have thought that silly before, but now if you're not going to be able to sing as a full group, you're going to find other ways to use music in worship and do it. So I think there's things that we'll do. I could see us going into, it's been so fun from where I am to just hear some of the stories. I think could see things more with things like puppetry there's just unlimited potentials if we open up our creativity and imagination. So I think we have glimpses of what it'll look like 5 years from now, but I still think there's a lot to unfold that will affect what worship looks like 5 years from now.
Thank you very much.
Ruth.
I've been trying to figure out what my specific question is, which is why I've sort of waited. It's on a different topic. And it's about ministering in these highly divisive times and trying to make, big decisions about, when, if, how to begin to worship, have public gatherings for worship. And also any kind of issue becomes wrapped up with people's virulent political opinions. And, I have in like 10 minutes going into a council meeting where we're going to talk about, this, and we've talked about a lot about the how. We don't know the when, but we've talked about the how, trying to have all our ducks in a row before we make a decision, et cetera. But I know that no matter what decision we make, I will get hate mail. I know this because I've been, I've gotten incredibly hurtful emails about you liberals this, and how can you do that, or you should be doing more, and you're not fighting enough for these, and no matter what happens, I'm damned. And the concept of, for me, the doing ministry in these times is exhausting. And other emotional things too. I won't go into that long list. And I don't have a specific question, because I don't think there's this, oh, here's the solution, Ruth, this will fix everything. I don't think that exists. But I guess I'm just sort of saying that it is an exhausting, demoralizing, beating you down kind of thing. So it doesn't surprise me that people who are on the edge of retirement said, yeah, it's happening. And if I were 3 years older, I'd be in that list, but I'm not. And so, I continue on. But it's very hard when you're always hearing you're not enough. And you hear it all, not only from the church, but from the congregation, but from the church, that you should have a, why don't you have a Black Lives Matter sign? And why don't you have a rainbow flag? And why do that when you feel like no matter what you do, everything is wrong, or minimally not enough in either direction. It's a hard place to minister.
I completely hear what you're saying. And we talked a little bit earlier about who gets to label things as political. There's even another level of that right now, because frankly, politics enters into how we be church right now. And that's, I don't want to say it's completely new, but I don't think it's been as intense as it is right now. In my career experience, I won't put that upon anybody else, but I unquestionably think that there is a unique difficulty to ministering in this season, which is demanding and relentless, and the challenges we don't even see when it gets, we can't see at the moment when it'll be resolved. There may be pieces which resolve it, but exactly when it gets resolved, who knows? Perhaps the fears even creep in of, will it get resolved? So yeah, I mean, we need to be supporting one another as church right now, even when we do church differently. So I talked about how proud I am of what our churches have done in the last 8 months, and that's absolutely true. And yet this day is complicated. So that's not the only truth. And I think the thing that has made me saddest is when I see, and I do see this with some regularity, our churches, and I'm personifying church, so that's probably not totally true, but people from our churches pick on other churches that you're not doing it right. Oh, well, you're not worshiping in person right now. If you really were brave, you'd worship in person. Well, you be a part of the discernment for your own community and let this community discern for themselves. Our job, we need a lot of 1 Corinthians 12 right now, that we need to be building up the body and not breaking down the body, not saying we have no need of you or you don't serve a legitimate purpose. And we need to infuse that in how we are our church again, and build one another up, unquestionably. I hope that through the message that John Thorhauer sent out about a month ago, through the pieces that we've tried to put out around clergy appreciation this month, that we've brought a little reminder of, we know how difficult this moment is, and we see how sacrificially and consistently our clergy in all settings are stepping up and trying to meet the needs of this moment. And we are so proud of you, and God bless you for the work you're doing.
I didn't, it was not my intention to imply that I didn't think I was being supported. It's just sort of expressing sometimes things just suck, and it's just,
yeah, no, I didn't take it that way. I just,
yeah,
we need to keep saying that stuff, because we're part of the voice saying the body needs to work together too. I mean, that's part of what we need to be doing. So, Gerry, I saw your hand.
Yeah. And don't you think that the lack of community?
I think we had Gerry get hung up.
It's her internet speed.
She's in one of those places. Gerry, you got locked up a little bit in that. Can you repeat what you were saying?
Okay. It says my internet connection is unstable. I think it's a lack of communication within our churches. Can you hear that?
Yep, lack of communication in the churches.
Yes, because we had one family, because we have virtual coffee hour after the online service. And they said, this one family said, we don't know what to do because we don't feel like we're part of the church anymore. And that was an eye-opener. That lack of communication, when you go to church on Sunday and you chit-chat with each other and you catch up, and if there's something that's happening, you hear about it, it doesn't flow quite as much this way. And people do feel left out, and especially those that, that we visited on a regular basis, or that had a part in the church, and now their part is not working. And that lack of communication is such a big issue. And I don't know how you fix that.
So, I mean, the two words, well, the word that would come to my mind is intentionality.
Yeah.
And energy. I mean, I think the only way you ever fix relational communication things is about being intentional about them and continually giving them energy.
Yeah.
The challenge is this time is so demanding of all our energy.
Yeah.
It's asking more, but I've used a couple times the word imagination. I think we need to be careful that we are using our imagination around all the things the church does and not just worship.
Right.
How do we keep connection and build community even when we have to be physically distanced from one another? How do we do Christian formation when things aren't the way they do? How do we do stewardship? All of these things need our imagination, and we need to build up the body by sharing that imagination with one another, because frankly, what is happening in Plymouth may trigger something, and Keene may trigger something, in Brentwood, Kingston may trigger something, in Chester may trigger something, in Deerfield. You know,
Yeah.
that imagination feeds it in different places, and we need to be sharing it.
Good.
Harriet, before you speak, I'm going to just let people know we have about 5 minutes, and
This is really quick. I just wanted to say that, you know, listening to this, and I feel like my heart is actually breaking for pastors. And, you know, when we give our pastor, you know, a vase of sunflowers, that may show her that we understand how hard she's working, but that's pretty easy. And so I'm wondering, there's all kinds of clergy training. This is probably bizarre and not going to get answered now, but what about some sort of congregational training or deacon training
Yes.
on serious ways to support pastors? This is probably I don't know, I'm not a pastor, but is this the hardest time in the life of any pastor? I mean, it's a horrible time. We can't just sit there and ask the pastors to do everything. Somebody teach us what to do. Teach us what to do. I'd help.
so many of you have probably heard that one of the things that's not happening coming up is Prepared to Serve, which is one of the places we do some of our best training. We're not going to try to emulate Prepared to Serve in a virtual format, because we just don't have the technological nor staffing infrastructure to make that happen with 60 workshops in one day type of thing. But we will be probably trying to spread more educational opportunities, particularly for lay people, out over the winter and springtime. So I've written this down as one piece we may be able to have conversations with. Just the one other thing I'd say to you, Harriet, and then I'm going to let Judy have the last word for this evening. One of the things we would encourage our churches to give to their pastors is things like additional time off, because they're exhausted, and that's something that tangibly can rejuvenate. For the most part, giving additionally time off does not have major fiscal impact on churches. It's something you can do with more minor impact. That's part of the reason that we're trying to do things like produce the Horton Center Summer Sunday, the annual meeting worship that you can use. I know the Council of Conference Ministers is looking at another worship service before the end of the year. Some opportunities where you can say, we have something that you can plug in and we can give you some time off just for you. And now, then you got to give the time off and not call and not worry about tell them not to worry about the stewardship thing, and not worry about, because if you keep coming at them, it's not really time off. And yes, needs are very great right now, but if you want your pastors to be at their best to be able to serve you, you need to give them some time away from serving. Judy, I promised you.
Yeah, thank you for the plug for the online services that you have. I think that's a real important service for our ministers' support. I was struck by, was it Ruth that stepped up and spoke about how she felt about being a pastor at this time? Was it Ruth? And I was thinking that I wonder if her words were so searing, but I wasn't surprised by them. I wondered if she might write a letter, an anonymous letter of a pastor to my community that talks about how difficult it is, that talks about sometimes feeling, the triangulation and the hurt that goes on, not to put congregations on the line in terms of this is how you're treating me, but as an insight into what it's like, and it be anonymous, and maybe have that being able to share in our congregations that this is how it can feel. I don't know, maybe as a being a minister at this time, because I've heard about how hard it is. I see how hard it is. I hear about the things that are above the surface, but that heart-wrenching struggle that is happening, it's really hard to hear, but it's so important to hear. And I wonder whether that's something that could be done or make sense to done. Just a thought.
So I don't want in any way to speak for Ruth. I do think it's important that, every pastor is experiencing this differently. But there's some commonalities in what I'm hearing, and it's not all that different from what Ruth said. And I would say, particularly for those of you who are lay folks, sharing some of that story is important. It was an act of vulnerability on Ruth's part to share that today, because frankly, if that gets back to our congregation, there's probably some kickback. And that would be true for any of our clergy. So lay folks, if you can share some of this story as you hear it, that's going to be really helpful to your pastors. And I will say that's also part of my responsibility to be sharing some of that as well. I don't want to just put that on you. That's also part of what I need to do. So, well, it's kind of a heavier place to end. Our time is drawing to a close. I do want to take a quick moment, just because I haven't had a chance to do this face-to-face, done some conversation in email, but I just want to say welcome, Sarah, and welcome, Meg, because I haven't got to look in your eyes and say that. So, and I look forward to the day, whenever it may be, that I can look at you really face to face and say, well, probably won't be welcome at that point, but I'm glad you're here.
Great, I'm happy to be here. I'm so happy to be here. I know this is a challenging time to be a pastor, but I'm pleased to be in Plymouth. So, hi everybody.
Likewise, I'm like Sarah, I'm very glad to be here. So thank you for your welcome, and I've been made to feel very welcome. So thank you all.
Very good.
Actually, Gordon, I have a question. Were you going to pray?
I would think, particularly with as heavy as we got, I think that's a wonderful way to close out our time together. So may we open ourselves up to the presence of the divine in the presence of one another. Oh God, we come to you this evening, and we know you have heard our every word as we have talked this evening, and there is so much that challenges your church right now, and there is so much that challenges every leader of your church, be they pastors, be they clergy in other ministry settings, be they lay leaders, be they Sunday school teachers, be they the children in the Sunday school, because indeed you call the gifts out of each of us to be about the work of your church. And every one of us is particularly challenged right now, in part because church doesn't totally feel familiar the way we understand church to be. May you center us in this moment. May you instill boldness and courage in us. May you energize us when we feel utterly drained. May you draw us together as the body of Christ, building one another up for your holy work. May you give us moments to rest in the green pastures beside the still waters in your loving embrace. Oh, Holy One, the church doesn't totally feel familiar right now. And yet we feel your presence in our midst nonetheless. We feel how the winds of your spirit moves among us. We hear the whispers of divine wisdom in our ear. We feel the community, though apart in some ways, drawn together in others to embody your love. Please help us not to lose sight of you in the midst of the church just because it doesn't feel like we find you in the ways that we used to. Help us have the vision and the imagination to find you where you are this day, to embolden our spirits, to strengthen our steps, to guide us into a future, whatever may come, a future that the Holy Spirit has only begun to imagine, and yet a future where your holiness reigns in this earth, in this creation that you have blessed us to walk upon. This we ask in your holy name. Amen. Thank you all for joining me this evening.
Thanks, Gordon.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.